This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh, back with you. And it's been a while since I've had a conversation. That's not your fault. That's been my fault. But we're back at it. And you know the whole point of White Flag with Joe Walsh is to speak with every week people who don't think like me. People who disagree with me. I think it's so fucking boring if I spent every day speaking to people who thought just like me. And I've got one of these guys on with me today, and I've been so excited to get him on. Anthony Conwright, I know. He's a friend. We became friends after I met him when I was primarying Donald Trump back in 2020. Anthony and I met before the Iowa caucuses. He's a writer, a journalist, doing a lot of freelance stuff. He's written some great stuff for The New Republic, The Nation, and Mother Jones. Anthony, I will also identify you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You are black, and you are would it be fair to say you're a good, principled man of the left?
I think good principled man is a good place to stop.
Touche. I love it. I wanted to get you on, and I've been trying for a couple weeks, ever since it was Nikki Haley a few weeks ago when she just fucked up and bungled that question. Was America, first she screwed up the slavery question, then she screwed up and she said, was America racist? And she said something like, we were never a racist country and we aren't a racist country. And that started a whole brouhaha. And Anthony, as we get into this, as you know, because I've stepped in it a lot, but I've always been fascinated by the issue of race. And so I wanted to get you on to talk about this. And I think it's an issue people need to not be afraid to talk about. The question I'm going to put in front of us, just to get us going, and we need to analyze the question first, is really simple. And by the way, this is going to be hard for you, but I'm going to ask you right at this point to give me a yes or no answer. You're going to struggle. Okay, the question for you and I is this right now, and then we'll get into it. Is America a racist country? The key word there is. Is America a racist country? Right. Anthony, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. When somebody puts that question in front of me, is America a racist country? Middle-aged, old, white guy I am, I would say, I don't think so, no. Now, the first thing, Anthony, that I think you and I can agree on is, was America a racist country? To me, that's the easiest thing in the world, right? Like slavery, right. Jim Crow. Was America a racist country? You would certainly concur with the was part of that, right?
Absolutely.
So so we sweep that aside. For the record, middle-aged white guy, Joe Walsh, and much younger black man, Anthony Conwright, agree that America was a racist country. We have a history of institutional racism in this country, slavery, and if you don't know more than that, go read a fucking book. Right. Help me, and I'll give you the first shot at this, my friend. When we ask that question, because I think we do disagree on this, is America a racist country? Like, analyze that question. What does that question mean for you, and how do you interpret that question? Go ahead.
So in a lot of ways, first of all, actually, thank you for having me on. I've been waiting to do this with you forever. But I think that here's a problem with the question. It feels very logical, right? It feels like, well, I could say yes and then back it up with data, fact, statistic, all of that. But I actually think we should kind of throw that out the window because it's actually an emotional question.
Interesting.
And I think that's sort of the the rub. And I totally understand why someone on the left or anyone, would ask Nikki Haley, was or is America a racist country? All these things, blah, blah, blah. To me, it feels more of a kind of like a gotcha question, even though it is a softball, obvious, like, what should you say, right? What the answer is. But I think the problem is we have to I think as a society we have to get to the what does it mean for all of us in society at large if America is a racist country, and what does it mean if it isn't? Those, I think, are the really
And
important aspects of the question.
let's get to that, but I'm going to try another tact with you and respond to this. When we ask that question, is America a racist country? We're talking about right now in the year 2024. I'm not trying to trick you, but I'm just trying to explore another. I want to get this question right. Like, how do we define that, Anthony? Like, how do we define what would you use to define if or if not America's a racist country? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think of it. I think of the question and the answer as how I would tell the story of America, right? So, if I say America was a racist country, and if I were to unpack sort of what I think we mean when we say racist, let's say anti-black, in a way that the country was designed that the worst thing you can be is black, and all of these structures would make a person not want to be black, and
Interesting.
being
I'm going to
black
stop you
is
there. I'm going to
worse.
stop you there because that's really interesting as a black man. Like, and maybe this is where you're going. Like when people say, is America a racist country, they right away talk about systemic racism. And maybe that's where you were going. But I've never heard it put like that, Anthony, that America was a racist country because we were anti-black. I've never heard it put that way. Continue. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I think for some, like when we think of like racism or something being racist, or like I think it triggers like this weird like sort of reaction to think about it as a individual thing. So like our individual, like it's almost as if like, well, because
Are there racist?
49%. Yeah, exactly. And is it a majority or a minority? So if only 49% of the country is racist, then America can't be racist. And so like I think that's not like I don't think that's a good way to look at it. I think it's to really think about it in terms of when the country was founded, it was founded on the premise of being anti-black. And so if I were to say, okay, well, so if I'm narrating this story of America, and I say, well, it was, but it wasn't anymore.
Yeah.
So that means something
Happened.
at some point in time happened. And that thing would have brought America back to some sort of equilibrium, right? Or it made it into something new.
You know what? You're a big jerk because that's a really interesting, clever, smart way to put it. And it puts like me on the spot, and I appreciate that. We agree America was racist, slavery, Jim Crow, and all the rest. For me to claim America's not a racist country, as you said, Anthony, there has to be a point where shit changed. We can get into that in a minute. And I also think like white people like me get very defensive when we ask that question. Like, come on, what do you mean?
Right.
Look at all the progress, Anthony. Come on, man.
And the wild thing, it's not even just like a white people thing. As you and I both know, there are black people who sort of adopt conservative ideology, and in order to sort of exist in that space, America as an entity is always has to be redeemable.
Yeah.
right? And if you say America is a racist country, it presents America as this fallen and irredeemable figure. And so, like, for someone who heralds the American story and the America existence, that you're literally triggering an anxiety response in them to reflexively go, no, it isn't. And so, like, I disagree with those people, and I can understand why they respond that way, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. But I think, like, but I think we have to again think about when we talk about change, what are we saying
So,
change?
okay. So and I appreciate you've really challenged me right out of the gate, and that's good. So I'm going to try to answer that question and give you the point where things changed,
Right.
to try to justify me saying we're no longer a racist country. And then you can shoot that down. We acknowledge, man, that there are racists in America, period. And I think, Anthony, before I give you my answer, do like America could no longer be a racist country and still have some racist individuals, right?
Right.
Okay. So that's everybody listening to us. That's a given that there are racists in America. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, is the country racist? And that kind of talks about institutional systemic racism, the rest. So Anthony challenged me. I'm going to give you so I'll answer it like this, man. The country was founded upon slavery, anti-black, racist institution, which then the country went to war over, and then we endured years and years and years of Jim Crow, racist, institutional, systemic racism, and all the rest. And then 50 some years ago in the 60s, with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, things began to change. And now, 50 some years later, I acknowledge there's still some systemic racism, but I don't call America a racist country, because since the 60s, whereas we were like completely institutionally racist, there are still strong remnants of some institutional racism, but a lot of it has abated. And so it's a matter of degree to me that says we still got to work at systemic racism, but I don't want to call us a racist country because we've gotten rid of so much of the systemic racism that was bad. Respond to that.
Here's maybe, I don't know if it's a poor analogy, but it's something you made me think of when you were describing it. I don't know if you've ever met someone who is an alcoholic or had to go through some sort of drug treatment program, but
My
even when they're
oldest son, yeah.
so yeah, I hope he's doing well in
Yep.
recovery. And I would imagine, even though he is sober, he might describe himself still as an alcoholic.
Bingo.
And so I think typically we don't really. I think let's just start from, let's just say, slavery. I don't think we fully understand the totality of what that was. And I think it's hard to sort of talk about in some ways, because what it did psychologically, not only to the enslaved, but to people who owned slaves, it was so horrific. I don't actually think we can fully grasp it. So we tend to think of enslavement as this sort of a la carte thing, where there were white people who could own black people, and and the enslaved folks like had no rights whatsoever. And even me saying it like that doesn't quite
Yeah.
do it
Yeah.
justice. And so we go, well, slavery ended with the 13th, right? So, but we don't know really how to talk about what actually ended. So, was it the position of the slave that was eradicated, or was it just the fact that there were people who could not own people anymore?
That part. That part.
Th-
That we made
there
we
we
made
go.
that illegal, against the law.
Right. Right, exactly. And so I think we don't know how to. So, like, to me, when I think of enslavement, I think of a position in society, not just an
What do
act.
you mean by that?
So, if you were to think of, you could almost think of it as like a class, right? So, we have like the 1%,
Yeah,
et cetera,
yeah,
et cetera. So if you were enslaved, you were a part of a class that were people who were non-human.
yeah.
Right. So if you were a slave, you were alienated from any sort of biological history, all those sorts of things. You had to submit to totalitarian power, not only of your owner, but to another class of people by proxy who were also your owner. Right. So there are all these things, and not to get too theoretical with it, but there's a sociologist called Orlando Patterson, and he has a great, fantastic book about this. And I'm totally blanking on the
That's
name; it'll
okay.
come to me in a bit. But I think when we can think about it like that, when we think about enslavement as the being a position in
But
society
it
that has
ended.
many
It
constitutions,
ended.
right? Right. And it was one particular element of that experience ended, right? And then, as you know, like it ended in as much as people couldn't own other people, but it exists as a punishment for a crime,
Explain
right?
that. Explain that.
So, so when you look at the 13th
Yeah,
Amendment, of course, like, it's slavery shall exist no longer
yeah.
except for punishment for a crime, right? So within the law is a baked in loophole of how to keep a slave class, basically, which is through incarceration.
And are you saying, Anthony, that that aspect is still used today, especially in the way young black men or whatever are incarcerated at higher rates and all the rest? That you're Are you saying that that is a remnant of slavery, or are you saying that is part of slavery?
I think it's part of it. So if you think of enslavement, I think we have to figure out a way to extend our thinking about it beyond just someone owned someone else. That's just one element of it, right? So if we were to talk about the entire slave, like what we might to be able to fathom it was like, just being owned is one part of it,
But wouldn't
right?
you
So we
wouldn't you agree that that's the biggest part of it? Literally denying basic freedom to another human being, like one human being owns you. That's
right.
the biggest part of it. No.
Probably, I would say so. Yeah, I see. Yes to what I get what you're putting down, and I would say yes to that.
Because you couldn't
And
do that
so,
today. We wouldn't, like, the thought
right,
of that would just be anathema to us. Even if it was legal, it would be anathema to us.
unless we were putting people in prison.
Well, I want you to hold that prison thing because I want to get to that in a
Yeah.
second. I want to add to what you said, though, in that the experience you're laying out for black people in America, slavery, the word we don't use enough is unique. This was unique to black people. Nobody
Hmm.
else in this country or coming into this country has had to start with that. Yeah.
That the point you just made right there is so huge. And so let me kind of explain how big what you just said is and why it's important.
Probably ruined my
It
whole argument
created
by saying it, but go ahead.
but no, it's great. It's great because what you're talking about, what you're really like, a class of people were created that didn't exist before. So there were no black people before slavery. You would have belonged to a tribe, right? So
Here.
I might have
Yeah.
in the world, you had the concept of someone with darker skin, right? Always existed. So
Yeah.
if you look at, Othello is a Shakespearean play
Yeah.
that is based off an Italian play, the Moors, right? So, but you could also, before that, if you would have been African and belonged to a tribe. And so the what America did was create a class of people.
And other countries.
Right. Well, yes, and in America, it was the what happened was really unprecedented in the sense that black to be black meant you were a slave. The possibility of enslavement was always
Can I ask you a
accessible to you.
question? Anthony, blacks back in Africa and around the world owned black slaves, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the concept of slavery, black people enslaved, we didn't invent,
Right.
but you're saying
We created, so maybe so here's one way to look at it. So the obviously, of course, enslavement was not a unique experience to America, right? So slavery has always
yeah,
existed, but slavery based on the fact that you were something, and the way that the entire legal structures of a country changed to keep that class. That's what is so unprecedented. That there was there that America found a way to reproduce slaves. So, for example, slavery might have been, you might have been at war with another country, right? And you lose. Now you're taken
yeah.
as a slave. You might be in some sort of debt or something. There was a way. There was a way out. What's unprecedented in America is that the laws were changed, so there was no way out. It meant if you were black, you were a slave. And when I think when we say, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but there are people on the right who have used this. Well, there was also slavery in Africa thing, and we weren't the only ones. And I'm like, think about what you just said. You are essentially saying that the enslavement of Africans might have been the one thing the entire world agreed upon at one point. Like, that's like a big deal. That what you're saying is the known world we're all in agreement that if you came from this place, then you could be a slave, even the people there. And so, like, that to me, like, they tend to use it to kind of minimalize
Yeah.
things. I'm like, no, you actually sort of bolstered how important in the totality of what it was.
Well, and the other point, Anthony, is yes, slavery predates America and black people owned slaves. But I think one of the points you're making, unless I'm misinterpreting it, is yeah, back in Africa, black people owned other black people, but it wasn't a black thing. Here in America, it became white people owning a class of people, black people.
Exactly.
Do you, but as you move along my story and and I claim that we're no longer racist because we've done away with so much of the systemic racism from the 60s on. Do you buy some of that?
I understand the sentiment. Maybe I'll put it like that. I understand the sentiment of it, and it makes sense. Like, why? I understand why anyone would say that, right? So, and I think if I were to suggest that, that because of legislation is reflective of some sort of moral or ethical progress, I don't think those two are the same. I think the law sometimes represents politics more than it does like an ethical or moral.
Do you, like, I think we still have a ways to go, but I think as a white guy, we've made a hell of a lot of progress on race in this country. Would you say a hell of a lot of progress, or how would you phrase that?
I would say I would say so progress. Okay, I think the reason why we kind of think of progress and sort of try to scale it out,
Yeah.
right? Like, are you a little racist? Are you a lot racist? To me, it's kind of like it doesn't really matter, right? Because if it's there, it's there. So I don't think progress
Interesting.
represents the end of. I don't think progress represents the end of something. I just think, well, there might be structures to limit the expansiveness of something.
Okay, that's really cool. That's an interesting take because I would say like it's a spectrum, and way over
Mm,
here was the beginning was slavery, then Jim Crow. That's the worst.
mm,
And we've eliminated, say, 70 or 80% of systemic racism. We still have some, but
mm.
progress matters because there's got to be a point there where you've done so much to eradicate systemic racism that you can say, okay, we got work to do, but we're no longer a racist country. Whereas you would say, I'm speaking for you, so correct me, until every last fucking remnant of systemic racism is gone, America is a racist country. Is that fair?
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much. Like I think we need the narrative of progress in order to sort of redeem ourselves. And I'm saying let's just get rid of that. Like that's a sort of an emotional desire.
But
The
can
need
I
like
slap you upside the head? I hear
go
that
for
and I respect that, but
it. Hmm.
like progress does matter though. Like I think you
Hmm.
discount like progress should matter. It's not just to redeem ourselves. I mean, I think that's part of it. Like us white people will feel better. Oh, we're making progress. I get that.
Hmm.
But progress is real progress. Like we're better off now. Black people systemically are better off now than they were 220 years ago. Like that counts for something,
Absolutely.
no?
Yes, but I don't know what it counts
That's a
for.
good answer.
I couldn't tell you the thing, but that's why again, like I think it's an emotional question disguised as a historical logical one, right? Like because like, yeah, there it progress is great, but what if progress
Keep going. I
what
think I know
if
where you're going. Keep going.
what if progress creates the conditions for holding on
Us to stop. Yeah.
to there you go.
Okay. And by the way, this is why this is so fucking interesting to talk to you, younger black man, because that's a
Mhm.
whole different nuance on what progress means. And I hadn't thought about that enough. If white America's out there saying, we've made progress, we're done, guys, we won, that kind of gives us an excuse to stop trying to make progress, is what you would say.
There it is. There it is. It becomes it actually becomes the opening to creating further harm, right? Because now you can go, well, I'm not discriminating against you because you're black. We've made progress, right? Like that's and so that's why I think we have to kind of find another way to think about racism and progress and all these things because and to be honest I think it's odd because like I think the narrative that requires progress is a very liberal one,
What do you mean?
right? Like that is a very it's sort of like it's a very liberal typically like white liberal like
Yeah.
pat myself on the back
Like,
redemption
like,
story.
like I voted for Barack Obama. Look at me. Look at me. I'm not a racist. Look
Right,
at me. I voted
right.
for Barack Obama. Woo hoo hoo. Yeah.
Right. And then guess what they did afterward? Voted for Trump. And so like
Many of them.
and so and progress requires suffering,
But you
right?
don't
Like
discount. You don't discount. Like you think progress is a good thing.
oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think anybody trying to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing is always
You
something,
you
is always a good thing.
you worry that it will become an excuse not to do any more. Is that
Oh,
fair?
I think it's been used,
Ah,
like that in a lot of spaces. And so that's why I hate talking about look, I hate talking about progress, but I understand why we have to, and I understand what it does emotionally. But it kind of folds us into like, oh well, it takes us out of the actual question and puts us in something. It takes us somewhere
that's
else,
really, Anthony,
right?
that's so interesting because my point of view is we were 100% racist, slavery, Jim Crow, and all the rest. We're making progress. We're making progress. We're making progress. There's some point on that line where we've made enough progress that we can say, okay, we still got issues, but we're no longer a racist country. Now let's keep working at it, but we're not a racist country anymore, but let's keep making progress. Whereas you would say, and again, maybe this isn't fair, until it's all gone, every last crumb of systemic racism is gone, we are a racist country still.
So let's keep make so therefore we have to make progress.
Yeah. Okay, you're a little bit more you're harsher. Again, not
I
that's not the right word, but
know
you're
what you mean,
yeah,
but I know what you
come
mean.
on, come on, come on. We got to keep going whereas I'm come on, give me a little pat on the back. I'll keep going, but give me a little pat on the back.
Mm.
You know what's funny, Anthony, and this probably backs up what you're saying. Like Nikki Haley got shit for what she said rightly. But
Hmm.
like, and I know you know this, Kamala Harris was asked in 2021, is America a racist country? And she said no. And then she said, "But we got to keep working, blah, blah, blah." Joe Biden was asked and he said no, but slavery and Jim Crow still live with us, blah, blah. All politicians, I think, Democrat and Republican, are afraid to say yes, America
Hmm.
is still a racist country. Even Kamala Harris said we're not. But you'd have a problem with that.
Because okay,
I get it politically, right? Why she said it.
exactly, and so that's why, and I
That's why
hate,
you hate the
and
question.
there it is, because look at it, like think about it logically. America, so to say for Kamala Harris, and I don't mean to critique her in that way because I think it's hard when
It's
you're
hard.
a woman, a black woman, and you're asked that question,
Oh,
and the people who are going to
boom.
vote for you are white. Like like I get it, and that's where I go. Okay, black folks, we have to understand this answer is not for us. This answer is for
Ah,
somebody
that that's
else,
that's a good way to
and
put it.
and like you just have to take it, and so like that's but like what's I think frustrates people is that you're saying America isn't a racist country, but yet you have no problem being celebrated as the first black woman to be vice president. So like how do those two things like live in the same world? Like that it just doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. That's really interesting, Anthony. Maybe there are far left politicians, white or black, who, when asked that question, would say, "Yeah, I love America, but America is still a racist country." But you're right. I think most politicians, even most Democrats, would be afraid to say America still is because most people don't want to hear that. That's like bad mouthing America. That backs up your point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I get it. I think Nikki Haley was on, I'm pretty sure she was on a radio show in New York this morning, and Charlemagne the God, it was in the Breakfast Club, and Charlemagne the God had asked her again to like,
Oh, she was
is
on with him?
America, I'm pretty sure it was
Do
today.
you,
I didn't get a chance to look at it,
do you know
look
what
at the
she said?
date. Yeah, she goes, here's the, to paraphrase her answer.
Yeah.
I experienced racism. We are still there's still systemic racism, but America is not a racist country. And it's like and Charlemagne the God is like, okay, look, you just have to say that because you're afraid. And she doesn't want to move. She doesn't want to just go yes. Like, but I think here's the disconnect.
And by the way,
Poli-
Anthony, and I know you and I know each other, and you like me, but that's kind of the answer I'd give. Like, yes,
right.
like people like you have helped open my eyes to systemic racism still that I was not aware of. I acknowledge there's still some systemic racism. I just no longer believe we're a racist country because we've eliminated so much of it. But that's a bad answer in your perspective. But go ahead.
Well, it's not bad. Like it's not bad. I think it's almost like an answer that just needs a little bit of love and therapy. Like it's just like that's all it is, because it's an emotional response, right? Like it's if I were, I'm sure there are many listeners that you have that are married and happy relationships. And I tell you one thing, let your spouse cheat on you a bunch of times and you come back and you go, well, last month it was 5 times. This month it's only 3. So I've made a lot of progress. You should pat me on the back. It's like, try that with your wife and see how that goes. Like we have a hard time because we so want to believe in the American dream and we want to hold it tight. Like the country has to feel redeemable, right? Like I so get it. And I think in particular politicians, the disconnect that they have is they don't understand that the American public can actually handle a lot of honesty, but it's all about the framing. And so, had Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nikki Haley simply said, yes, we still are a racist country. And you know what? We've done a lot of work to not be a racist country, but we still are. And therefore, we have a lot of things that we need to improve on. And for my white constituents who might lean on the conservative side, guess what? The same policies that impact black people, they impact you too. When you catch a cold, though, black folks catch the flu. So it isn't as if white people don't suffer from police brutality, from gun violence. Those things aren't, they happen disproportionately to black people, but they happen to you too. And so part of the progress that we need to make is eliminating all of this shit for all of us.
Okay, but
because that's what makes us a better country.
Okay, now I'm gonna push back on your analogy of the adulterer, the married couple, and the guy's cheating. He's committing adultery, right. And he was doing it 5 times a month. Now he's only doing it 3 times a month. Look, I'm making progress. I'd pick apart that analogy by saying cheating on your spouse is slavery. And okay, you cheated on her. You had 5 slaves a month. Now you got rid of 2. You freed 2. Now you still only have 3 slaves. Well, that's still slavery. So you're no longer cheating, but you don't totally trust your spouse, and you got problems with the way she eats, right, or whatever, or he eats or whatever. Right. So there's still issues there, but you're no longer cheating on him or her. Like, because slavery's gone. Jim Crow is gone. There are other issues that that the marriage needs to work on. But if you're cheating on her, that's slavery, man. I don't care how many times you cheat a month. Go ahead.
So here's the thing. I would say the cheating isn't slavery. It's being anti-black.
Okay.
That's because I think, and this is what's tough because I think slavery was so horrific, right? And I think what we do to make progress legible, we think about sort of the physical violence that accompanied slavery, right? So if you were to watch a movie about slavery or something like that, or if you even look at like how images of police brutality are repeated in the media, well, the violence of slavery is used, I think, to anchor the legibility of progress. But I think if we think beyond just the act of enslaving people, I think we can kind of get a larger understanding of what that was what it meant to be black, to be a part
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
class.
And
And I think that's the hard part.
yeah, and Anthony, I agree. Look, we are who we are, and you are right that us white people want a pat on the back, and we it just makes us feel good if we know we're making progress, and we've made progress. And I agree, our side tends to cling to that concept. But I don't buy that it's all just emotional. Like, it's not for me. It's historical and factual. We got rid of that original sin of America. Just that. We got rid of slavery. I know you, and you made an interesting point about how there's still aspects of slavery with us. Fair. But we got rid of slavery. We got rid of Jim Crow. And a number of other things down the line. When you look at historically in this country, that's not emotional to me. Those are just hard things that this country did that is good. Still work to go, but we've done hard things that is really, really good. And that's not emotional to me. That's just thank God slavery doesn't exist anymore. Thank God Jim Crow doesn't exist anymore. Thank God that the average 28-year-old black man in this country has more opportunity now than he did 140 years ago. But maybe you disagree with that, Anthony.
No, it's not that I do. I don't. I actually okay. I don't disagree with what you're saying because it makes a lot of sense to me why you would say
Yeah.
it. I'm trying to think about the language we have to talk about Jim Crow, to talk about slavery and all these things, and then to think about, so when we say Jim Crow ended, what exactly are we trying to, like, what exactly are we saying? Right? Like, are we saying, well, now Jim Crow was black people couldn't vote or black people didn't have their civil rights, or black people were could suffer from violence because of who they are.
This is so
Right? Like,
this is Anthony, this is such a fascinating conversation. And because we have your perspective is so cool and it's different. Jim Crow ended. It's segregation is no longer legal, but again, by the law, whereas you would say, okay, Joe, I get that, pat on the back, but it's still being practiced out there.
there we go. That's it. That is exactly it. That's exactly it. And I think so. We're already a history repressed country, right?
Totally.
And so the language that we have to talk about things, I think, is inadequate. Because first of all, there's just so much there,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes we use words we use one word to encompass an entire experience, and we don't really, and we lose the opportunity to talk about the nuance of all of those experiences, right? So, of course, in a colloquial way, when we say Jim Crow, I think most people really know what we're talking about, right? Like, people get it, but we also don't know what we're talking about at the same time, which makes it difficult. So when we say, Jim Crow is over, or the Civil Rights Act passed, but then if we take that a step further, so then what did that allow? So then what did that mean in practice? What did that mean people could or couldn't do? And if something ended, then how is it still happening or taking place in all of these different forms?
Right. Where maybe another way to phrase it. So it's a good thing that Joe Walsh and Anthony Conwright in the year 2024 can sit at the same lunch counter in a restaurant. That's good, concrete progress. But
Right.
Joe Walsh and Anthony Conwright walk into that restaurant, the owners of that establishment, even though they can't make us sit separate, they may look at us differently.
And exactly. And they may look at me and go, what are you like this? I might have, they might look at me with sort of some sort of suspicion, right? I'm not saying this is always the case. I'm not saying this is
No.
every white person, but if we just follow the example, kind of like just follow this example we've set up, you're absolutely right. So like, yeah, they may not be able to segregate us, but they can have structures in place that would keep me from visiting or patronizing that restaurant, right?
Well,
So,
go ahead. Like, but
so for
legally,
example,
they can't discriminate. Legally, I mean, they can try to maybe get around
right.
some of it, but legally, they can't say, Anthony, you're a black man, you can't come into this restaurant.
Here, let's do this. This is a slightly more extreme, but I think it's a little more
Cool.
concrete. So, legally, we can't like kill people, right? That like murder is bad. We can all agree that it is bad. And murdering someone because they're black is like that's pretty bad. We don't want that as a practice, right? But let's say you wanted to murder someone because they were black. How might one do that in a state like, let's say, Florida, in a stand your ground state, right? So you could there are ways you can get away with doing things with racist intent that we don't have a language to stop legally.
So that's interesting, Anthony.
You,
That's really interesting. I support stand your ground laws, and I don't know the stats. Maybe these laws negatively impact black people. The principle of stand your ground laws I support. I've never looked at it as racially or having a racial impact. I mean, white people use it against white people, but go ahead.
right, exactly, true. Absolutely, and that would be my thing if I'm a politician, is to talk about it like everybody suffers from this thing, and in particular, what if there is a racist white man and he is looking for a reason to kill a black
Yeah.
person. Well, he could do it, I was standing my ground. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying there isn't like people shouldn't be able to protect themselves, and whatnot. But what I'm getting at is, and if to go back to our restaurant example, well, we can limit the amount of a certain type of clientele if we have this restaurant in a gentrified neighborhood. We can make a certain clientele feel uneasy by the way we treat them, and while it might negatively impact our bottom line, we can survive just on white
See, I'd
patrons.
say,
So,
I'd say,
like,
Anthony, I'd say that is not an example of systemic racism. That's an example of just plain fucking racist who own that restaurant, like individual racist.
who might have the structures to enact
Well,
that
they
racism?
no longer right. They no longer have the laws to be able to do it. They no longer have the government protecting them to do it. And your example on stand the ground law, you're right. Say a white racist down in Florida was looking for a reason to kill a black man, and he used the stand your ground law. Well, in America today, that white man's going to be put on trial, and he either legitimately used the stand your ground law or he didn't, and he was looking to kill a black man, and a jury would determine him guilty. And so that's how we remedy that. Whereas you might say the juries may be biased, but yeah.
There you go. Right. And so, but like, I get the point. I get what you're saying. It's assuming there's no racism in the checks and balances of the misuse of a law to negatively impact people, then that person would have done something, would have been found guilty. Right.
That's how we
And then
remedy it. Yeah.
right. Right. And we know historically, juries have the system, the legal system, the checks and balances have treated white votes and black votes differently, and so
Yeah.
that's the rub, right? And I think that's what would, like, it's so deeply rooted. I can't say that America
You just
is not a racist country.
you just said something that I heard, and this is all about listening. And I'm glad you said it. And even if I disagree with you, I understand now. You said this is so fucking deeply rooted. This ugly, ugly, evil history of racism in this country is so deeply rooted. That resonated, Anthony. That until you pull the whole fucking thing out, that would be your.
Well,
thought.
you actually did it. You did it because you said I saw you were working through. Oh, well, they might be arrested. They have to face a trial. Oh my God! But if the jury is biased, then that person can get off. So there are all these opportunities for the racism to manifest legally, right? And so,
well, but I would say
so
one nuance I'd say is a jury of that person's peers, white, black, brown, whatever they are, down in Florida, if they get that guy off, the white guy, I wouldn't call that systemic racism. I'd call that, again, there are individual racists on that jury who had their own biases. But like, I wouldn't say that's institutional racism, systemic. Juries are individuals.
That's interesting. You know what? I'm actually glad you said that, because that gives us kind of an opportunity to talk about the difference between, or when does individualism become systemic?
So, okay, so you got a mortgage banker who's a racist, and he's much less inclined to give black people mortgages. Maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot here. To me, that's an example of systemic racism. And we've seen studies where black people at a number of banks, right, have historically, and it still goes on today, have a harder time getting a mortgage, even if their credit rating's the same, income level's the same, blah, blah, blah. I don't think there are banks anymore that would write down a policy of we're going to be harder on black people when it comes to mortgages. But to your root example, I think there are still biased racist people at these banks who still make it harder. But maybe that's not accurate. Maybe it is still an unwritten policy. Like, you know what I mean, Anthony? You couldn't be a bank.
Exactly what you mean.
You couldn't be a bank in the year 2024 in America and say, our policy is it's going to be a hell of a lot harder for black people to get mortgages. A bank that said that would be thrown into court immediately and done. But a bank could have an unwritten policy, or a bank could still have bad lenders individually who are bigoted.
So this is okay. So this is actually really good, because I think we can.
It's fun to brainstorm
really dive
with
into.
you.
Yeah, we can. Let's dive into. Let's follow the thinking.
Okay.
Right. So let's say I am a racist bank, or whatever the institution is. Right. So I have been told by the U.S. government that I can no longer explicitly say black people. I cannot say we will not give mortgages to black people.
It's against the law.
Right. So I go, okay, you know what? I'm going to wipe that policy. We will only give mortgages to people who have they have to have a college degree, they have to have an 800 credit score, they have to have owned a house previously, they have to have owned a car, they have to have all of these things, right? So I'm not explicitly saying I'm not going to give a mortgage to black people. In fact, because I have to, I'll leave. Yeah, fine. We can get one or two black people. We'll get them in. But there are structures that will limit the black folks that we do give mortgages to, right? You can even take it to voting. Well, we can't explicitly keep black people from voting, but you have to take a literacy test. You have to, you have to pay a poll tax. You have to do all these things. And of course, those things were outlawed. But
right.
And yet we've seen examples of
still trying
laws. There you go.
But that's interesting. And I agree with you on the voting, Anthony. That's interesting because you're a bank and you're lending money to someone. Of course, you have to look at someone's credit rating. You have to look at their employment history. So you have to go through those things. Those things should determine whether somebody gets a mortgage loan. And maybe in the back of the lender's head, he knows, well, this is going to impact black people in my community more. But then what does he do with that, Anthony? Because you have to go by somebody's credit rating and income and job history to give a mortgage. So do you make special allowances for black folk in your community when it comes to loans?
So I think, okay, so before we get to that specific question, here's what I would say. Structurally, perhaps we need to investigate the ethics of our mortgage lending policies.
Completely.
That's what I would
completely
say. So like that's how I would approach it.
Because it's
so
still
like,
going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like, and would I say like there should be programs to help black people specifically? Absolutely. And the reason why I would say that is because, as you said, like it's still going on. And if we can say there was a history of something that negatively impacted black folks, then we should do something explicitly.
Would you prefer special programs according to race, or would you prefer special programs according to like class, helping lower income people, which might indirectly then more help black people? Or would you make it by race?
So this is where it gets complicated for me, and probably where my own, ignorance starts to come into play, or at least maybe suspicions more so than ignorance, is because I don't know. I don't think we really know how to talk about race, right?
True.
Like, so when we say, even if we say a black person, like, are we saying both their parents have to be black? What if they're adopted and they're biracial? Like they're adopted by a white family and then the biological parents are biracial and they're 50-50, like, but they don't necessarily like quote unquote look black. And so I think I'm not against looking at race. I'm thinking of what I know about America and how and what can happen when we look at race, even though I think it needs to be looked at. Like does that make sense? Like I'm not,
No, that makes
I'm not
sense.
anti. Yeah.
That makes sense. Hey, I want to, we're coming on an hour here, and you and I could do this for 3 hours. And by the way, this will be conversation number 1. We're doing another one within 2 months. We're gonna pick up from where we left off, because this is. I can think of very few more important topics to talk about than this. And I say that as someone who's gotten in trouble racially because I push the envelope sometimes too hard. I want to ask you about one other quick area, and I just want to get your broad thought on this. And I don't mean this to be disrespectful, and if it is, hit me. The black experience in America is unique. No other race or creed has gone through what black Americans have gone. End of story. That's special, and that needs to be treated in a special manner. But how do we balance that history with the fact that it's 2024, black folk, I'm just saying this, Anthony, to be purposely offensive. Black folk, quit with slavery as your crutch and Jim Crow as your crutch. And come on, damn it. You want to make something of yourself? It's on you now, okay? I admit there's still a lot of racists out there, and I admit there are still obstacles that you got to go through, right? That Joe Walsh doesn't have to go through. But quit fucking bitching, moaning, and complaining. You want to make something of yourself? It's on you. Quit blaming this systemic institutional racism. Quit blaming America. Go do something about it, man. Go. It's on you. I have
I would.
many of my right wing friends. That's what they.
That's right. I would ask, well, where are the you? I would say, well, where are the racist people, and what are the things that are still racist?
There are always going to be racist people in America. I would say always going to be racist. You, Anthony, like if this is between you and I, Anthony, it sucks.
Right.
You got to live with racism more than I do. Middle-aged white guy. They're always going to exist. Fucking beat them. Go make something yourself. Go stay in school, get an education, get a great job. Away you go. That'll
Where,
show them
where do racist people exist? Where
everywhere,
do they work?
everywhere. And I would say, actually, this is an interesting question. Do you think, Anthony, racists exist everywhere? I think there are fewer racists in America in 2024 than there were in 1824 or 1924. But respond to that. Do you think there are fewer individual racists as a percentage of our society individually than there were 120 years ago? I think there are, right?
I don't know. I would say it's sort of, in some ways, the number of racist people sort of, it doesn't matter, right? But I think to sort of this conservative hypothetical person that we're talking about, if you say racism exists, well, you have to be able to tell me where. If you're going to say I have to defeat a racism or a racist, you have to tell me how. And you have to tell me how, where, and when I defeat a racist boss who doesn't want to give me
Okay.
a promotion.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, you big young black man jerk friend of mine. I'm going to put that
Mm-hmm.
on you, Anthony, because you've lived this. You've made your way through a country that I haven't made my way through because of who you are. And you've made and are making something of yourself. How have you done that? How have you done what you've done? What have you done to work your way through this crap? Because you have. You
Yeah,
are.
it's and here's the thing. I got to be honest.
Huh.
I haven't really been placed in a lot of conservative spaces. I've worked in liberal circles. That's where I spent the majority of my life. And there's definitely racism in liberal institutions.
Right.
And so I would say I've never I wouldn't say I've overcome racism, right? Because I think it would be sort of arrogant for me to say that I had an answer
What
for
would you,
something
Anthony,
that.
what would you, and I know you don't have a 16-year-old young black son right now, but what would you tell your black son? Or let me ask a leading question. Wouldn't you tell your 16-year-old black son in America today that ultimately, even though there's still a lot of shit and a lot of racist shit in America, ultimately, young man, if you want to make something of yourself, it's going to be up to you. I mean, ultimately, that's true, right? Like, it is going to ultimately be up to you. That's what you'd tell a kid,
Right.
wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, right, because everyone, sort of has the ability to make decisions and whatnot. However, I would say to my son, I would say, look, I would take him outside, a la Simba and Mufasa.
Love
And,
that, yeah.
this is we're on Pride Rock,
Yeah.
and I'd say, you see all of this land? I would say it's all a giant plantation. And here's the thing:
Okay.
you are going to have to figure out how to survive on this plantation.
Interesting.
And I can't tell you how to do it, but I can tell you how to be a good person. And I may not be able to tell you all the ways to be a good person, a good man, or whatever. But as you go through this, you're going to have to make certain choices. To use your voice when you're afraid to use your voice. To sacrifice privileges you have to help another person. And if you want to survive this plantation and survive in a way that feels good, well, you might have to use your voice when you're a little afraid. You might have to help someone who needs some help. You might have to lose and sacrifice some of your privileges to help another person. And you know what? There might be somebody you encounter, a boss, a colleague, who is really, really racist. And you're going to have to make the choice. Do you want to endure that? And do you want to change the system? And can you live with it? Now, there are certain times I had to live with it. Your grandfather had to live with it. Your great grandfather had to live with it. And maybe there were times where we didn't use our voices when we should have. That's going to be up to you.
So that, my young friend, is a beautiful fucking answer. That is illuminating. I think we agree that ultimately you'd tell your kid, and you said this, like, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do. It is up to him or her. And I appreciate that because ultimately it is. But every white person listening to us right now needs to hear you holding your kid up on Pride Rock and this is a plantation. That metaphor that in the year 2024, my younger, educated, highly intelligent black friend Anthony still views America as a plantation. Maybe a better plantation than it was, but still a plantation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so fascinating for me to hear. And I'm glad, even though I think my gut disagrees, I know my gut disagrees, I'm so glad you said it. And because I'm really, really going to think about it.
Right. It's hard. It's a hard thing to imagine. See, the language again. So like me saying,
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. It's helpful. It's good.
Because imagine what it would have been like if when I say plantation, of course, everyone's mind goes to enslavement, yeah. Right. And like,
I know what you meant. I know what you meant.
Exactly. And still, if imagine how do you tell someone that you love, here's how to survive this thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you, but they had to tell somebody, they had to tell people something.
Yes.
Right? And so like, still today, we have to tell, I don't know what it would be like to have a daughter. I don't have kids, but damn, every man who has a kid, no matter how promiscuous they were, no matter how much of a dog they were, they're looking at their daughter and they're going, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
How do I tell this precious little being that I love to death? How do I tell them to navigate the world in which sexual violence exists? Yeah. And we all know. I don't have a daughter, but I have nieces, I have sisters, and I think we all know, conservative or liberal, what we would want to do to a person who harmed the precious women in our
Bingo.
lives. And like, we have to tell them something, and we all know what,
I'm going to, Anthony, I'm going to summarize. This has been so interesting. Anthony Conwright believes America is still a racist country, and we will be a racist country until we remove every last crumb and remnant of systemic institutional racism. Generally, that's where you are. Joe Walsh would say we're no longer a racist country because we've made so much progress. I know we still have a ways to go, but we've made enough that we shouldn't be labeled a racist country. But I'm going to wrestle with this, Anthony, and you've given me so fucking much to think about. This has been fascinating. Could we? By the way, but I want people listening to us to follow Anthony on Twitter at AE Conwright. That's CONWRIGHT. Again, follow Anthony on Twitter at AE CONWRIGHT. I'm absent-minded, but every time he writes something for one of these publications, I always love to promote it. So read what he writes. Make me a promise that we'll continue this discussion.
Oh, you say when, and I'm here.
Done. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.